Under the burning light of a desert sun, the world seemed carved from gold and dust. The wind carried whispers of stories long buried, of tribes who once ruled these plains, and settlers who dared to cross them. A small creek cut through the dry land, shimmering like a silver vein against the sand. There, beside it, lay a man in a torn shirt, his chest rising shallowly, his face shadowed with pain and dust. Over him knelt a young Apache woman, her long hair falling over her shoulders. Her eyes filled with something between fear and wonder. The white man had fallen from his horse hours ago, wounded and half delirious when she found him. She had never been this close to one before. She had been told many things about them, how they built great towns, carved the earth with iron wheels, and took more than they ever gave. But this one looked nothing like the fierce invaders her elders spoke of. His skin, pale under the sun, looked fragile, and the way his hand trembled when he tried to lift it made her pause. For a long time she just watched him breathe. Her people were gone to the hunting grounds for the season, and she had been left behind to guard the valley. The white man was not part of her world, and yet something about his brokenness made her stay. When he finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was her dark-haired, wrapped in deerskin, the scent of sage and smoke clinging to her. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. She brought water from the stream and tilted it to his lips. He drank as if tasting life for the first time. His eyes softened with gratitude, and though they spoke no common language, something unspoken passed between them. She dragged him beneath the shade of a mesquite tree, using a blanket she'd found in his saddlebag. The wound on his shoulder was deep but not fatal. She knew the plants that could draw out fever and stop bleeding. She had learned from her grandmother, the tribe's healer. When she pressed the herbs against his skin, he flinched, but didn't push her away. Days passed in the quiet rhythm of survival. She fed him broth made from wild roots, changed his bandages, and listened to his strange words. He called himself friend again and again, pointing to his chest. Trying to earn her trust, she studied him with a curiosity that grew deeper each sunrise. His hands were large and calloused, his beard thick, his eyes the color of the sky after rain. He worked to build a small fire, though he struggled, and when he finally succeeded, he looked at her and smiled like a boy who had done something worth pride. She didn't smile back, but she felt something stir inside her, something she didn't have a name for. The land around them was silent, except for the rustle of dry grass and the call of a distant hawk. It was a lonely place, where time seemed to stand still. She had always known solitude, her parents lost to war. Her tribe scattered, but the quiet between her and this stranger felt different. He didn't try to command her or look down on her as the traders did in town. He looked at her as if she were someone worth knowing. One evening, when the sky turned red over the rocks, he sat beside her near the fire. The wound had healed enough for him to move without pain. He pointed toward the stars, tracing shapes in the dark, naming them softly in his language. She listened, her head tilted, eyes reflecting the flames. Then she told him, in her tongue, of the stories her people told, the spirit of the coyote, the woman who became the moon, the warriors who rode the wind. Neither understood the words, yet both understood the meaning in the following days. He began to help her gathering wood, repairing the old shelter, washing his clothes in the creek. He made her laugh once, though she tried to hide it. The sound startled her. It had been years since she'd laughed. When he caught her eyes afterward, something warm passed between them, a quiet but undeniable. Then, one afternoon, she saw something that changed everything. As he washed in the stream, she hid behind a boulder, watching. She had never seen a man's body like his strong, scarred, pale against the golden light. She had seen Apache men before, warriors of her own people, but they were lean and dark, marked by sun and battle. This was different. It fascinated her. It confused her. She turned away quickly, ashamed of her thoughts. But that night, as she lay awake listening to the wind, the image haunted her. Her tribe had spoken of white men as destroyers, those who cut down forests and built fences where buffalo once roamed. Yet here was one who smiled gently, who thanked her for saving him, who shared food in silence without pride. She didn't know what to believe anymore. When the moon was full, they sat by the fire again. He had carved something from wood, a small horse. He handed it to her shyly, and she took it, holding it as if it were made of glass. She traced its rough edges, feeling an ache she couldn't explain. It was then she asked the question that would change both their lives. Her voice trembled as she tried to form the words in broken English, a language she had only heard from traders. "So white people make children this way?" she asked, her eyes wide, innocent, full of wonder. "Can I try too?" For a moment he froze, not sure he had understood. The fire crackled between them, throwing shadows across her face. She wasn't mocking him. She wasn't teasing. She was sincere, curious, like someone trying to understand a mystery of life. He could see the confusion and honesty in her gaze. He swallowed hard, searching for words, but the desert seemed to hold its breath. The creek whispered nearby, the stars glittered like silent witnesses, and the world felt suddenly smaller. She didn't move, waiting for his answer, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the wooden horse. He saw in her question something deeper than curiosity. It was loneliness, a desire to belong to a world that was changing faster than she could understand. She had lost her people, her language was fading. And here before her was a man from another world offering warmth she had never known. He could have laughed or turned away, but he didn't. Instead, he looked at her with something that wasn't pity and wasn't desire, but a quiet human ache. The fire flickered, painting her face in gold and shadow. She looked back, eyes searching his for truth. Neither of them spoke again for a long time. The night stretched endlessly, the stars turning overhead like old spirits watching from above. In that silence, something fragile began to bloom, something both beautiful and dangerous. And as the wind swept through the valley, carrying the scent of sage and smoke, he realized this desert was no longer just a place to survive. It had become the ground where two worlds would collide, hearts first. Before history ever caught up, but before he could speak, before he could decide what his answer should be, the distant sound of horses echoed through the canyon, the unmistakable rhythm of riders approaching fast. Her face went pale. She grabbed his arm, eyes wide with fear. "They come," she whispered, and in that instant, the fragile peace between them shattered into uncertainty, leaving the question and everything it meant hanging in the hot desert air. The riders' approach thundered through the narrow valley, their hooves striking the dry ground like drums of war. The Apache woman froze, her breath caught halfway. The wounded man tried to sit up, pain flashing through his face. He didn't yet understand what danger meant here, not the way she did. She grabbed his hand and pulled him behind a cluster of rocks, her eyes darting toward the ridge. From the way the horses moved, she knew they were not her tribe. They were scouts, probably from a neighboring band that distrusted strangers. If they found a white man with her, there would be no chance to explain. They waited in silence, hearts pounding. The riders passed through the valley without seeing them, their war paint glinting red under the sun. When the echoes faded, she released his arm, and he let out a shaky breath. He didn't know their words, but the fear in her eyes told him everything. She turned to him sharply, motioning toward the creek, toward the distant hills. "Go," she said, her voice tight. He shook his head. His wound still pained him, and even if it didn't, leaving her now felt impossible. He owed her his life. In the days that followed, their uneasy bond deepened. The creek became their world. She taught him how to move quietly, how to hide his tracks, how to listen to the land. He taught her a few words in his tongue: water, fire, safe. She repeated them at night, her voice soft like the wind, and he would smile. The desert had turned from a place of danger into a strange sanctuary. But behind the calm, there was a shadow neither could escape, he told her. Through gestures and broken speech, that he had come west with a group of settlers. They were bound for the Colorado Territory, but raiders attacked, and he was left for dead. She watched him as he spoke, his voice low, his eyes filled with something more than sorrow-guilt. Maybe. She didn't ask what his people had done to hers. She didn't need to. The ground between them already carried the weight of both their histories. At night, when the fire burned low, she would look toward the horizon and think of her childhood. Before the soldiers came, before fences and iron rails cut through the land. She had lived in a village near the mountain springs. Her father was a warrior who wore eagle feathers and spoke to the stars. Her mother made beads from shells and sang to her in the moonlight. She remembered laughter, the smell of cedar smoke, the sound of drums. Then one winter, the bluecoats came. They burned the lodges and took her brother. She never saw him again. From that day, she learned to live without asking why. The white man listened when she told her story in fragments, his expression heavy. He didn't interrupt. He simply reached for a stick and drew lines in the dirt, trying to show her his world houses with roofs, roads that stretched like rivers. People who lived far apart but called it progress. She didn't understand why anyone would want that. To her, the earth was a mother, not a thing to be owned. Still, she couldn't hate him. Not this one. He was different. When he looked at her, it wasn't with the eyes of a conqueror, but of someone lost, someone trying to understand what he had been taught to fear. The days grew warmer. The wound on his shoulder closed, leaving a pale scar. He began to walk farther each morning, sometimes bringing back small treasures from the Landan old horseshoe, a feather, a smooth stone. He would hand them to her like gifts, and she would place them in a small pouch she carried. She didn't tell him that Apache women only kept such things for men they trusted. Then came the day he tried to leave. He woke early, packed the few supplies they had, and pointed east. Town, he said. Doctor people. His eyes were soft, but firm. She felt something tighten in her chest. No, she said, shaking her head. Not safe. She pointed toward the hills again. Bad men there, smiled as if he didn't believe her. He didn't understand that danger wasn't just from warriors. It was from everyone. When he started to walk away, she stood in his path, blocking him. You go, you die, she warned. He stopped. The wind picked up, carrying sand between them. He could see tears glistening in her eyes, though she didn't let them fall. Finally, he nodded and set down his pack. That night, she sat across from him by the fire, her face unreadable. He watched the flames dance in her eyes and felt something shift inside him. He had seen war, hunger, and death, but he had never seen courage like hers. She had saved him once, but he knew she would risk her life again if it came to it. Later, as they sat in silence, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. The warmth of his fingers startled her. For a heartbeat, she saw not an outsider, but a man. And for him, she was no longer just a rescuer from the desert. She was the only part of this land that felt alive. The following morning, they found tracks near the stream fresh from at least 3 horses. She crouched down, her hand hovering above the prints. They come back, she murmured. Her face hardened. He looked toward the horizon, seeing nothing but dry hills. But the fear in her eyes told him enough. They had to move. They packed quickly, taking only what they could carry. She led him through a narrow canyon lined with red rock and thorn bushes. The sun burned overhead and their shadows stretched long. As they climbed, she spoke of her grandmother, who once hid in these same cliffs during a raid. Spirit of the mountain protector, she said softly, almost to herself. He didn't understand the words, but he felt their weight. By sunset, they reached a small cave overlooking the valley. From there, they could see miles of open land. Smoke rose in the distance. Someone had lit a fire, maybe too close to where they'd been. She sat at the cave's edge, silent, staring at the horizon. He joined her, offering a piece of dried meat. She accepted it, wordlessly. As darkness fell, the air cooled. Coyotes called from the plains below, and he could feel the night pressing close. If they find me, he said slowly, pointing to himself. What they do? She looked at him, her expression somber. Kill, she answered simply. Then after a pause, she added, and me too. He turned toward her, his face pale in the moonlight. The thought of her dying for him twisted his gut. No, he said, shaking his head. I go. You stay. But she only looked at him with steady eyes and said, I save you once. I save you again. The night stretched on, quiet except for the sound of the wind through the rocks. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the firelight on her face, heard her voice asking that strange question again. So white people make children this way? It had seemed innocent, but now it carried a new weight. She wasn't just curious about his world. She was caught between two worlds, her old life fading and something new stirring, something neither of them could name. When dawn came, she was gone. He stumbled out of the cave, calling for her, his voice echoing against the stone. Panic gripped him until he saw her returning from the ridge, carrying something wrapped in cloth. She placed it in his hands. Inside was a small pouch, filled with red earth, feathers, and a tiny carving of a coyote. "Keep," she said. "For protection," he nodded, not trusting his voice. They both knew what was coming. The riders would not stop until they found them. The desert had given them shelter, but it would not protect them forever. As the sun climbed, they prepared to move again, each step taking them deeper into the unknown. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was heavy with meaning, with things neither dared to say aloud. And somewhere, far beyond the canyon, a faint echo of hoofbeats returned. Growing louder with every heartbeat, the morning wind was cold as it swept through the canyon. Carrying with it the scent of dust and fear, they walked in silence, following the narrow path that wound between jagged cliffs. The Apache woman moved with the quiet grace of someone born to this land, her steps careful and deliberate. The white man followed behind her, his boots leaving heavy prints in the sand. He kept glancing over his shoulder, certain they were being followed. The sound of distant hoofbeats still echoed in his memory, a threat that never seemed to fade. They stopped only when the sun reached its peak. The woman crouched near a cluster of rocks, listening. "They follow," she said softly. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. He didn't argue. He had learned to trust her instincts. She pointed toward a narrow trail that climbed the side of a ridge. "Up there," she said. "Old path." They not find. The climb was steep, and his wound began to ache again. Sweat dripped down his neck as he pulled himself higher. She reached back once, offering her hand to steady him. For a brief moment, their fingers touched, and he felt a strange mix of strength and gentleness in her grasp. When they finally reached the top, they found a small plateau with a view stretching for miles. From there, they could see the riders, 5 of them, racing across the valley floor below. Dust rose behind their horses like a storm. She motioned for him to lie flat. They watched the riders pass, the glint of their weapons catching the sunlight. He recognized the same markings he'd seen on the day he was ambushed. These weren't soldiers or settlers. They were hunters-raiders who lived by taking what others built. He clenched his jaw, realizing the same men who left him for dead were now searching for him again. When the riders disappeared into the distance, she finally stood. "They go east," she said. "Maybe not find." He nodded, though both of them knew it was only a matter of time. The desert had few places to hide. They made camp in a small hollow that night, the sky a blanket of stars above them. He sat by the fire, sharpening a knife he had taken from his saddlebag. She sat across from him, sewing a torn strap from her pouch. The quiet between them was no longer awkward. It was something else, an unspoken understanding. It's born from shared danger. After a long silence, he looked up and asked, "Why you help me?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were fixed on the fire. "Once," she said finally, "a white soldier take my brother. He was small. They say, teach him your ways. He never come back." Her hands tightened around the needle. "I hate your people. But hate makes heart heavy. I see you, almost dead. You look same as us when we fall." He lowered his eyes, the shame burning through him. "I didn't come to fight," he said quietly. "I wanted land, maybe peace." She gave a faint, bitter smile. "Peace," she repeated, as if testing the word. "Land is never peace. Land remember blood." For a while neither spoke. The fire popped softly, and far away a coyote howled. He wished he could tell her that he understood, but he didn't. His world and hers were too different. Yet as he looked at her face, lit by the flickering flames, he realized that she had given him more than life, she had given him purpose. Before dawn, they heard a sound that made both of them freeze, a rifle shot in the distance. She moved quickly, dousing the fire with sand. "We go now," she whispered. They packed their few things and slipped into the shadows of the rocks. As they moved, she took a narrow trail that led deeper into the mountains. The path twisted through boulders and brush until they reached a dry ravine. "We hide here," she said. They waited for hours, listening. At last the riders appeared again, their horses stopping near the creek below. From their voices she could tell they were arguing. Two wanted to go back, but one tall Scarface kept pointing toward the hills. "They smell your tracks," she murmured. The white man looked down at his boots, guilt written across his face. That night, as the riders made camp not far away, the woman and the man crouched in silence. The moon cast silver light over the desert, and every sound seemed to echo too loudly. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears. He leaned closer, whispering, "If they find us, we fight." She nodded. "They chase. We fight." He tightened his grip on the knife, though he knew it was little against guns. She carried only a bow and a few arrows, but her eyes were steady. The night stretched long and tense, the air heavy with waiting. Every rustle of wind felt like the start of a storm. By morning, the riders moved again, heading west. They had not been found, but the fear lingered. She looked at him as they packed to leave. "They come again," she said. "We must go to safe place." "Where?" he asked. She hesitated. "Old mission. White man place. Long gone. No one go there now." It took them 2 days to reach it. The path led them through canyons of red stone and valleys covered with dry grass. When they finally saw the mission, it stood like a ghost crumbling walls. A bell tower cracked in half, the air thick with silence. "My mother hid here once," she said. "Before soldiers take her?" They entered carefully. Inside, the air was cool and still. Faded paintings clung to the walls, and the scent of old wood filled the space. He touched one of the broken pews, imagining the people who had once knelt there. She set down her pack and began to clean a corner, preparing a place to rest. For the first time in days, they felt a hint of safety. She cooked a small meal, and he watched her quietly, realizing how much her presence had changed him. He wasn't sure what she was to him, savior, friend, or something more, but he couldn't imagine the desert without her now. That night, as they sat by the fire inside the old chapel, the rain began to fall outside, soft and steady. She spoke of her grandmother's story spirits that watched over lost travelers, and how every life was a thread in a greater weave. He listened, his eyes following the flicker of firelight across her face. Then she looked at him and said, "Why your people take so much?" Her voice wasn't angry, just curious. He hesitated before answering. "They think it's their right," he said quietly. "To build, to own, to change everything they see." He gave a tired smile. "But I don't think the land belongs to anyone." She nodded slowly. "Land belongs to the wind," she said, "and the wind belongs to no one." Their words faded into silence. Outside, thunder rolled over the valley. Inside, the fire burned low. She wrapped herself in a blanket and closed her eyes. He stayed awake, listening to the storm, his mind torn between gratitude and fear. Before dawn, a loud crack split the air, the sound of a gunshot. The bullet struck the stone near the doorway, shattering dust into the firelight. She was on her feet instantly, bow in hand. He crawled toward the wall, peering through a crack. 3 riders had found them. The rain had given away their tracks. The next few minutes were chaos. Bullets tore through the wooden beams, splintering the old mission walls. He grabbed his knife and ducked low as she loosed an arrow that struck one of the men's horses. The animal screamed and fell. Another man fired, the shot grazing her arm. She didn't stop. She drew another arrow, her eyes fierce, steady. He crawled toward the back, shouting, "This way." They ran into the storm, their feet slipping in the mud. Lightning lit the sky as they scrambled toward the rocks behind the mission. The riders followed, their shouts mixing with thunder. She pushed him forward, shouting, "Go." When they finally reached the ridge, they collapsed behind a boulder. The rain poured down, washing blood from her arm. He tore a piece of his shirt to wrap it, his hands shaking. She didn't flinch. "They not stop now," she whispered. "They hunt till we gone." He looked at her, breathless. "Then we run." She met his gaze, her eyes hard as stone. "No, we make stand." Lightning flashed again, revealing the valley below, dark figures moving through the storm, their torches flickering like angry ghosts. The rain kept falling, the thunder echoing through the hills, and between them, unspoken, hung a truth neither could deny. The world around them was changing. The land they stood on was no longer Apache land nor white man's land. It was something in between, a place claimed only by those desperate enough to fight for survival. As the storm raged on, she turned to him and said softly, "You learn now what my people know. No one can own the wind." He nodded, gripping the knife tighter, knowing the night was far from over, and that by dawn, the desert would remember their struggle in blood and rain. The storm raged through the night, tearing across the canyon like an angry spirit. Rain fell hard, washing the scent of smoke and gunpowder into the earth. The Apache woman crouched behind a rock, her bow drawn tight, eyes fixed on the dark valley below. The white man beside her gripped his knife, the rain dripping from his hair. Every heartbeat felt louder than thunder. The raiders were still out there, searching, shouting to each other through the storm. Their torches burned dim under the rain, orange sparks flickering in the darkness. She turned her head slightly, whispering, "They circle. They wait till morning." Her voice was low, steady, but he could hear the strain beneath it. He nodded, keeping his breathing quiet. He had faced men before in battle, but not like this. Out here, surrounded by endless desert and rock, there was no law, no mercy. Only survival. As lightning split the sky, she scanned the ground below, counting the shadows that moved through the rain. 5 left, she murmured. 1 hurt, maybe die. He followed her gaze and saw the faint movement near the broken mission. One of the men lay still near the doorway. She had hit her mark earlier, but for others remained angry and desperate. The rain slowed near dawn, leaving a heavy mist hanging over the valley. The ground was slick, the air cold. They had spent the night without sleep, each noise pulling them closer to the edge of exhaustion. When the first light touched the rocks, she motioned for him to move. "We go higher," she said. "They not find trail in mist." They climbed carefully, using the rocks for cover. His muscles burned with every step, and the cut on his shoulder had opened again. She saw the blood through his torn shirt and tore a strip of cloth from her own dress to bind it tighter. "No, stop," she said. "You strong? Keep go." Her words were rough, but carried a kind of strength that pushed him forward. When they reached the ridge, the mist began to clear, revealing the wide stretch of desert below. From up there, the broken mission looked small, a forgotten ruin swallowed by sand. Smoke rose faintly from its remains. He turned toward her, breathing hard. "They'll track us," he said. "They won't stop." She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon where the red sun was rising. For a long moment, she seemed lost in thought, as if listening to something far away. Then she said softly, "My people once lived beyond that ridge. A place of springs. Maybe safe, he repeated, though they both knew there were few safe places left for anyone. They walked all morning through the silent canyons, their footsteps echoing softly. The desert was beautiful and cruel at once golden hills. Bones of animals half buried in sand, the sound of wind whispering through dry grass. At midday, they stopped by a cluster of stones to rest. She knelt by a trickle of water that ran between rocks, cupping it in her hands and passing it to him. Their fingers brushed, and he caught her gaze for a moment longer than before. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy with something neither dared name, but their brief calm didn't last. The distant thud of hooves returned, faint at first, then clearer. She stood quickly, her body tense. "They find again," she said. He looked down the slope and saw the riders, 3 this time, spreading out to search the land below. She reached for his arm, pulling him toward a cluster of boulders. "We hide till night," she said. "No fight now. They crouched in the shadows, holding their breath as the riders passed. He could see their faces, rough men with rifles slung across their backs. One of them carried a piece of cloth torn from the woman's pack. They were close, too close. When the riders moved on, he exhaled, trembling. She looked at him and whispered, "They know we too. They not stop till both dead." He wanted to tell her they could run east, maybe reach a fort or settlement. But deep down he knew the truth. Out here, far from any road or help, they only had each other. As the sun set again, they made their way deeper into the cliffs. The air grew colder, and the color of the rocks turned dark red under the fading light. She led him to a narrow cave hidden by brush. Inside, the space was small but dry. She built a small fire, careful to keep the smoke low. He sat across from her, his hands trembling slightly as he held them to the flame. She tore another strip from her dress and wrapped it around his arm, where the wound had reopened again. Her touch was gentle but firm. "You bleed too much," she said. "Not fight long," he gave a faint smile. "I'll fight as long as I have to." She looked at him for a long time before replying. "You have a heart of warrior," she said, "but you not born to this land. It eats men like you." "I'm still here," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied, "because I save you." He laughed softly at that, and for a moment her lips curved into a small smile. But it faded quickly when she heard something outside, the faint sound of a horse's snort. She motioned for silence and crept toward the entrance. Through the thin brush, she could see the glow of a torch not far away. He reached for his knife and stood beside her. The fire inside the cave burned low, and the shadows seemed to close around them. She whispered, only to now, "The others wait." Her bow was in her hand, arrow ready. He nodded, his breath steady, despite the pounding of his heart. When the first rider stepped into view, she released her arrow. It struck true, hitting the man's shoulder and sending him falling from his horse. The second rider fired back, the shot echoing through the cliffs. The bullet hit the rock above them, showering dust and stone. He lunged forward, grabbing the fallen rider's gun before the man could reach it. Another shot rang out, this time closer. The woman ducked, pulling him back inside. "They know we here," she said. "No run now." He checked the rifle, his hands slick with mud and blood. "Then we make them come to us." The next few minutes felt endless. The riders moved cautiously, circling the cave. The sound of boots on stone grew closer. She met his eyes, and for the first time, he saw fear there, not for herself, but for him. "If they take me," he said quietly, "don't stay." She shook her head. "I stay, you mind to protect." The words hit him harder than the wind. He wanted to tell her she wasn't alone anymore, that he would fight for her too. But before he could speak, a shadow appeared at the mouth of the cave. The rider fired into the darkness. The blast lit the space for a second, and then he charged. The white man swung the rifle hard, knocking the gun from the raider's hand. The two men fell to the ground, struggling in the dirt. The Apache woman shouted, raising her bow, but couldn't fire without hitting him. The fight was brutal and fast. The raider was strong, but desperation made the white man stronger. He slammed the butt of the rifle into the raider's face, ending it. As he fell back, gasping, the woman grabbed his arm, pulling him up. "More come," she said. Outside, they could hear the last rider shouting, calling the others. The echo bounced off the canyon walls, carrying far. "He'd bring more," she said. "Tomorrow, maybe all." They both knew what that meant. As the fire flickered low, she sat close to him, binding the bruises on his arms. The night was cold, and her shoulder brushed against his. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist, the danger, the storm, the blood, only the sound of her heartbeat close to his. Then, softly, she said, "If we die, I want spirit free. Not belong to ground, not to white man world, just wind." He looked at her, the glow of the dying fire reflecting in his eyes. "If we die," he whispered, "we die fighting." Outside, the wind howled through the cliffs, and in the distance, faint but certain, came the rumble of more horses. The sound grew closer, echoing across the rocks like a warning. The woman rose, her face calm, her bow in hand. The man stood beside her, gripping the rifle, his jaw tight. The first light of dawn crept across the canyon walls, turning the stones gold and crimson. The riders were coming, their silhouettes dark against the rising sun. The Apache woman glanced at him once, her voice low. "This our land now," she said, and as the echo of hooves thundered closer, both of them knew the moment had come, the fight that would decide not just their fate, but the meaning of everything they had endured together. The sun rose over the canyon like a blade of fire, cutting through the last breath of night. The desert was silent for a heartbeat before the storm of hooves broke it again. Dust lifted into the golden air as the riders charged toward the cliffs. The Apache woman stood tall, bow drawn, her hair whipping in the wind. Beside her, the white man held the rifle tight, his hands steady despite the blood on them. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. They both knew there would be no running this time. The first shot rang out, shattering the morning stillness. The bullet hit the rock near her, sparking against the stone. She answered with an arrow that struck one rider in the chest. He fell hard, rolling into the dirt. The others spread out, firing from behind their horses. She moved quickly, sliding behind a boulder, loading another arrow. He fired too, hitting one of the raiders near the ridge. The air filled with smoke and the sharp echo of gunfire bouncing through the canyon walls. For every man that came closer, it pushed back harder. The white man moved with desperation, not just to survive, but to protect the woman who had risked everything for him. When one of the riders tried to flank them, she saw it first, shouted a warning, and loosed her arrow. It hit the man's hand, sending his weapon clattering to the ground. He turned to run, but the desert didn't forgive cowards. By midday, the gunfire faded. The dust settled. 2 men rode away, their shouts fading into the horizon. The rest lay silent on the ground below. The white man stood there, chest heaving, the rifle empty. His shoulder bled again, but he hardly noticed. The Apache woman lowered her bow slowly, her eyes sweeping over the valley to be sure it was truly over. Then she turned to him, and for the first time since they met, her lips trembled. He dropped the gun and walked toward her. She tried to hide her shaking hands, but when he reached her, she let herself lean against him. Neither said a word. The wind carried only the sound of their breathing and the crackle of dry leaves. When the danger had passed, they buried the dead near the mission, under the same sky that had watched the fight. She placed a stone over each mound, whispering something in her language. He didn't understand the words, but he knew it was a prayer for peace, even for their enemies. After that, the 2 of them sat by the small fire they built outside the cave. The air was cooler now, and the desert seemed quieter than before, as if it too needed to rest. He looked at her, seeing the exhaustion in her face and the strength still burning behind her eyes. "You could have left me," he said softly. "Long ago." She shook her head. The spirit said, "Not time yet." He smiled faintly. "You listen to the wind too much." She gave a small laugh, one that surprised even her. "Wind never lies," she said. They stayed by the fire until the stars returned. He told her about the world beyond the desert, the green fields, the rivers that never ran dry, the towns filled with noise and light. She listened with quiet wonder, though part of her knew she would never belong to that world. "Your people build fast," she said, "but they forget to listen to land." He didn't argue. He had seen enough to know she was right. The land was more than soil and stone. It carried memories, pain, and stories written long before his kind came. Over the next few days, they traveled together, moving north toward the hills she remembered from childhood. The world around them changed. Grass grew thicker, streams clearer. He began to heal, though the scar on his shoulder would never fade. She still moved with caution, her eyes always scanning the horizon. But there was something lighter in her now. A quiet peace. One evening, as the sun dipped low, they reached a small spring surrounded by wild sage. The air was cool, and birds darted through the sky. "This place," she said, her voice soft. "My mother bring me here when I small. Said water, never dry." He knelt by the spring, touching the water with his hand. It was cold and clean, reflecting the fading light. "Then maybe this is where we stop," he said. She looked at him carefully, as if searching his heart. "Your people wait for you," she said. "You go back." He met her gaze. "There's nothing to go back to." "Not anymore." For a long moment neither spoke. The only sound was the rustle of wind through the grass. Then she stepped closer, placing her hand over his. "Then you stay," she said simply. And he did. Days turned into weeks. They built a small shelter near the spring, using wood and stone from the nearby hills. He hunted, she gathered herbs and roots, and together they made something that felt like home. In time, she taught him her language, how to name the stars, how to call the rain, how to speak with silence instead of words. He taught her how to fix tools, how to plant, how to mark the days by the sun. Sometimes, when the nights were long, they would sit by the fire and listen to the coyotes cry across the valley. He would watch her face in the firelight and wonder how fate had carried them both, hired two people from worlds meant to collide. Yet here they were, sharing the same sky, the same breath, the same heartbeat of the earth beneath them. Still, the world beyond the desert didn't forget them. One afternoon, they saw smoke far off to the south, a new camp, maybe soldiers or settlers moving through. The white man tensed, knowing what that could mean. But she only looked at the horizon and said, "They pass. Land choose who stay." And they stayed. As seasons changed, the desert softened around them. The spring grew stronger with rain, wildflowers spread across the rocks, and new life came to the valley. He had never known peace like that before. There were no roads, no fences, no rules, only the rhythm of the land and the woman who had become its voice. One evening, as the sun sank low and turned the sky to fire, she told him the dream that had haunted her since before they met. "I see two hawks," she said, "one black, one white. They fight in storm, then both fall. When storm end, they fly together." She looked at him then, her eyes soft. "Now I know dream meaning." He took her hand gently, his voice low. "Maybe the storm was our way to find each other." She nodded. "Storm make land clean again." Years later, travelers passing through the canyon would sometimes speak of a small shelter by a hidden spring. They said a white man lived there with an Apache woman, that they spoke little but worked side by side like they had always belonged to that place. Some said they had seen the man teaching her to write with charcoal on stone, and her teaching him to listen to the wind. Others said they had vanished one summer night, leaving only a fire still burning and two carved hawks lying by the spring one dark. One pale, no one ever knew what became of them. Some believed they went north, finding peace among distant hills. Others said the desert took them both, that their spirits became the wind itself, forever moving, forever together. But those who stood in that quiet valley swore they could feel something in the air, a presence, gentle and watchful. When the wind passed through the sage and touched the water, it carried whispers of two voices, one in Apache, one in English. Mingling as one, the land that had once known war and fear had found peace again. Not through conquest, but through understanding. And somewhere beneath that wide, endless sky, the memory of a white man and an Apache woman lived on, a story of survival, of love born from danger, and of two hearts that learned the oldest truth the desert ever told, that no one owns the wind. It belongs only to those brave enough to listen.